Hello again, children. Are you ready for another chapter or two of Zeepa the Wichagong? Today we're going to read two chapters, chapter 10 and chapter 11, because they're short chapters, and overall the length of time will be about the same. So let's start with chapter 10. Zeepa, who had just left Tom's bedroom, climbed higher and higher up the fine old ash tree until he could sit on an upper branch and survey the whole of the village below him. The sun was shining through the leaves and a gentle breeze was blowing. He lay back against the trunk of the tree, closed his eyes, and breathed the outside air in deeply. This was the Wichagong's first chance to reflect on things since he appeared at Tom's window. He still did not know why the Zonga had compelled him to meet Tom, but he was enjoying learning so much more about humans than probably any other Wichagong ever. He liked Tom, and Tom loved nature too. That much was obvious. Not all Wichagong are alike, he thought, but we are not so nearly different as humans are. Hamish and Tom, for instance, are completely different in their values and beliefs. He thought of the things that humans have in their homes: the bath, the refrigerator, the TV, and the melon. They seem to be able to have what they want any time they want it. But is that a good thing, he asked himself. Then he stood up on the tree branch, stretched, looked around the village, and in 3 leaps from branch to lower branch to lower branch to the ground, he was ready to start his prowl. He skirted around the hedgerows of the gardens bordering the street. And when the garden stopped and the row of shops began, he darted around behind the shops to where there was no people milling around, and he climbed easily up a drain pipe onto the rooftops, and he carried on his journey. Whenever he had to cross a road, he was grateful that the village's streets were tree-lined, so he simply jumped from the roof onto the tree, ran along the branches of the tree above the road, jumped from one tree onto the other tree on the other side of the road, ran along those branches, and then jumped onto the roof, and he had crossed the road. He had decided to make his way to the butcher shop just to see if he could hear anything of interest. When he got to the butcher's, he edged to the front of the sloping roof and sat in the gutter right above the door of the shop. One of the benefits of being a Wichagong was his rather large ears, and by human standards, his hearing was nothing short of outstanding. So he sat on the roof and relaxed. No one could see him up here, and he enjoyed listening to the people below. Humans are indeed strange things, thought Zeepa, as he listened to all of the conversations coming up from the street. Nice day today, Mrs. Jones. Yes, I'm hanging a washing out in the line when I get home. Fancy a coffee, John? Wow, look at your tan. Have you been on holiday? The trains are on strike again, and so on and so on. It was all very pleasant, thought Zeepa, but I'm not learning anything that will help me understand what's going on. Then he heard a lady who was leaving the butcher shop, and she was meeting with a lady who was approaching. Hi, Sally, how are you? Said the first lady in a very cheery voice. Oh, I'm okay, Val. I'm just getting my shopping done, but do you know what? I can't believe the money I'm spending. I've just left the village store, and it's so much more expensive than the big store in town. It's ridiculous. I don't mind paying a bit more for good food, but it's exactly the same stuff you can get in the big store, except it's about 20 or 30% more expensive. I agree with you, Val, said Sally. My husband and I have already stopped shopping at the village store. We do most of our shopping now in the big store as well. Interesting, thought Zeepa, as he looked up at the sunlight. He sniffed the air and was just about to start his journey back to Tom's house when he glanced down and he saw Hamish and Andrew walking along towards the butcher shop. They went into the shop, and a few seconds later, they were back out on the street again. Zeepa watched them from above. They looked a little nervous, he thought. Don't say anything about the goblin, pleaded Andrew, just as the butcher himself came out onto the street, obviously letting his assistants serve the customers. What is it? Asked the butcher gruffly. We want a rabbit deal, said Hamish. Waste of time, said the butcher. You're just 2 dozy kids. You've got no idea how to catch rabbits. Look what happened last time. And mind, don't you tell anyone that I asked you to do it. No one must know where I get my rabbits from, okay? We won't tell, said Hamish. We told you last time we wouldn't tell, and we haven't told anyone, have we, Andrew? Andrew immediately said no, even though that very morning they had told every pupil who would listen to them in the playground about it. Snorted the butcher. Anyway, you let all the rabbits get away. Now, they will be harder for me to catch. They'll be more wary. They might not even return to that warn, you idiots. Anyways, can we try again? Pressed Hamish. We get the same deal as before, a pound a rabbit. The butcher stared at Hamish, then at Andrew, then back at Hamish. No chance, he said, and he walked back into his shop. What are we going to do now? Asked Andrew. I don't know, said Hamish, but I'll think of something to change his mind. And with that, Zeepa watched the two boys turn around and head back up the street. When the Wichagong got back to Tom's house, Tom was no longer at the desk in his room, but he had left his window open, so Zeepa jumped inside. He noticed an apple, a piece of cheese, and an egg cup of milk waiting for him on the desk. Tom must be having his dinner, he thought. And so he intently listened for someone coming up the stairs. No one was, so he relaxed and he started eating his dinner too. Eventually Tom came back to his room. How was your prowl, Zeepa? He asked. I enjoyed it, Tom. It was a beautiful evening and I'm always at my happiest outdoors. He then went on to tell Tom everything that he'd heard from the rooftop. Chapter 11. The next day, Tom got to school early and sat once again on the far wall under the shade of the oak tree with his rucksack beside him. I hope Zoe's got good news to tell me today, Zeepa. Surely her mother will not go ahead to sell the dog. Tom was very keen to ask Zoe for two reasons. First, he was keen to know the fate of the dog, but secondly, he was really keen to talk to Zoe again. He could see Hamish and Andrew arriving through the school gate together, and right behind them was Zoe. He tried to see if she looked happy or sad, but he could not tell from this distance. So he stood up, picked up his rucksack, and started walking towards her. Hamish and Andrew saw him approaching and thought he was coming to see them. What is it, poor boy? Hamish spat. Tom ignored him, walked past them, and said, Hey, Zoe, how's things? To Zoe, who smiled broadly. Tom's heart lifted. Obviously, this smile meant that Kelty, her dog, was not going to be sold, and that made him happy too. Almost equally responsible for his sudden elation, however, was the broad smile that Zoe had cast in his direction. She seemed pleased to see him too. Hamish spun round to face Zoe. You two seem to be friendly all of a sudden, he said. What do you think, Andrew? Do you think they'll be getting married soon? And as soon as he said this, he got the reward he had hoped for, because both Zoe and Hamish blushed deeply. Did you see how happy they look to see him, Andrew? She must be in love, he sneered, and watched again Tom and Zoe's discomfort grow. Zoe tossed her head back and looked the bully right in the eye. If you must know, she said, the reason I'm so happy is that my mother is not going to sell my dog. And she looked at Tom as she said this, and she couldn't help smiling again, and Tom smiled too. What do you mean? Asked Hamish inquisitively. Well, said Zoe proudly, my dog is so smart that the butcher's brother-in-law wanted to buy her for £500 so that he could train her to be a sheepdog in his farm. But my mum won't sell her, said Zoe. That's nuts, spat Hamish. £500 for a mangy dog, and your mum said no? She's dafter than I thought. And remember, my mum works in a bank, and I know that your mum is short of money. You should definitely get married to Tom. Poor boy marries poor girl. A perfect match. Andrew sniggered too, as he and Hamish turned around and walked away. Zoe, that's really great news about your dog, smiled Tom. I was sure that your mum wouldn't sell her. But Zoe, I'd be careful what you tell to Hamish and Andrew. They really are bad people. I know, said Zoe. I just said it to defend myself and to tell you, Tom. I thought how kind you were to me yesterday, and I wanted you to know about Kelty as soon as possible. And again she smiled broadly. This is turning out to be a great day, thought Tom, as the school bell rang. During morning lessons, Zoe was back to her normal self. She was attentive, contributing and accurate in her answers, and Mrs. Vanstone looked delighted. At lunchtime, as Tom sat on the wall eating his sandwich, he could see Zoe once more at the centre of attention amongst her friends at the opposite side of the playground. As Zeepa chewed on his carrot inside the rucksack, Tom asked him, "What did she think of this morning's lesson, Zeepa?" "It was fun," he said. "And yes, Zoe was a different person today. She answered everything correctly, and she sounded so much happier too." "Yes," agreed Tom. "But she shouldn't have told Hamish about the situation with her dog. I know Hamish, and he will use it against her any chance he can." And in saying that, Tom instinctively scanned the playground for Hamish, just to see what he was up to. He then saw him beside Andrew, talking at the bike shed. They were talking in whispers about something. He told Zeepa what he was looking at, and tentatively the Wichagong slowly peered over the edge of the rucksack. There was no one close by. Zeepa looked up at the oak tree above them, then the trees next to the oak tree, and his eyes followed a path through the trees that he could take from the trees to the roof of the school, and then down onto the roof of the bike shed. "Stay here, Tom," said Zeepa as he leapt from the rucksack, and then literally, it seemed, ran up the trunk of an oak tree and disappeared into its thick summer foliage. Tom watched intently, wondering what Zeepa was going to do. But he could not see him, and he was nervous. Surely it wasn't safe for a Wichagong to be wandering around a school on its own. Zeepa, on the other hand, was perfectly at ease. He had spent the last 80 years avoiding humans successfully. So he jumped from the oak tree, then across to the beech tree, and finally onto a sycamore tree before skipping lightly from its upper branches down onto the roof of the school. A quick run across the roof, followed by a short jump, and he was on the roof of the bike shed, immediately above where Hamish and Andrew were. So he heard and listened to them. And he heard Hamish say, "So you agree then?" I'm not sure, Hamish. Catching rabbits is one thing," said Andrew, but this is something completely different." "So you want to chicken out a bit, do you?" sneered Hamish. "Think of the money, Andrew. We might be able to catch the goblin again as well. Don't be a coward. We can do this easily." "Okay," said Andrew, "but we need to be incredibly careful. If we're caught, we will be in big trouble." "We'll not get caught," bragged Hamish. "I'm much too clever for that." And with that, they left the bike shed and walked to the centre of the playground, where a group of boys were talking together. Zeepa watched them carefully, but they only seemed to be joining in their conversation, nothing else, so he made his way back to Tom and the rucksack. Tom had waited on the wall as Zeepa had asked him to do, and was feeling more than just a bit anxious. What if somebody sees him, he thought. Then suddenly a green blur flew past his eyes as Zeepa leapt from the tree straight back into the rucksack. "Are you okay?" whispered Tom. "Yes, I'm fine, Tom. But Hamish and Andrew are definitely up to something," he said, before going on to tell Tom exactly what he had heard. And that's the end of chapter 11. I wonder what Hamish and Andrew are up to. See you next time. Bye.